The party scene was getting old. For years, my weekends were a blur of clubs, after-parties, and the same faces doing the same lines of cocaine off the same cracked phone screens. At first, it was exciting, but the magic had worn off completely. The coke wasn't fun anymore. It was just an expensive way to stay up all night, heart pounding, talking absolute nonsense until the sun came up and the horrible, crushing come-down started. I was just tired of it. Tired of the anxiety, the cost, the feeling of fiending for another bump just to feel normal again. Heroin was always the hard line, the one drug I swore I'd never touch. I wasn't a junkie. I had a job, I paid my bills. In my mind, heroin was a one-way ticket to losing everything. But I kept hearing stories about the high, not the jittery, paranoid energy of stimulants, but a warm, peaceful blanket, an escape. It sounded like the opposite of everything I was feeling, and the idea started to take root in my head. I had a rule, though. A stupid rule that my addict brain convinced me was a foolproof safety net. I would never use a needle. Needles were for junkies. That was the point of no return. But then I heard about smoking it, about chasing the dragon. I thought to myself, that's different. It's not the same as shooting up. It's more like smoking anything else. I convinced myself it was a loophole, a way to experience this legendary drug without the commitment, without the risk of real addiction. I could try it once, see what it was like, and then walk away. It was the dumbest, most naive logic, but I believed it. I just wanted to feel something different. So I made the call to a guy I knew could get it. I had no idea I was setting my own life on fire. The guy showed up an hour later. It was a quick, awkward exchange at my apartment door. He handed me a small, crumpled bit of foil, and I gave him the cash. I shut the door, my heart pounding. This was it. I unwrapped the foil and looked at the small, dark lump inside. It didn't look like much. It certainly didn't look like something that could burn a life to the ground. I remembered my rule, my stupid little safety net about only smoking it. It felt like a solid plan. I went into my kitchen and fumbled around, trying to remember what I'd read online. I flattened out a piece of tin foil, placed the tiny chunk of tar on it, and held a lighter underneath. A thin trail of smoke started to curl up. I chased it with a straw, inhaling as much as I could. The taste was bitter, like burnt chemicals. For a second, nothing happened. I thought to myself, is that it? Then it hit me. It wasn't a rush like cocaine. It was a wave. A slow, deliberate wave of warmth that started in my chest and spread out through my entire body, down to my fingers and toes. Every muscle unclenched. Every anxious thought in my head went silent. It was like being wrapped in the heaviest, softest, warmest blanket imaginable. The constant noise and paranoia and anxiety that had been my baseline for years just switched off. There was no come-down waiting for me, no jittery edge. There was only peace, a deep, profound, and utterly perfect silence. In that single moment, every other drug I had ever done became a joke. Cocaine was a frantic, pointless mess. Alcohol was sloppy. Weed just made me paranoid. This was different. This was what I had been looking for without even knowing it. It was an escape. It was relief. All my plans of trying it just once, of this being a simple experiment, evaporated with that first trail of smoke. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was going to do it again. I spent the rest of the night on my couch, chasing the dragon. I finished the entire bag before the sun came up. I wasn't trying to party or stay awake. I was just trying to stay inside that warmth. When I woke up the next afternoon, the feeling was gone. My apartment felt cold and empty. The first and only thought in my head was that I needed more. The one-time rule was a distant memory. This wasn't an experiment anymore. It was already a necessity. Those first few weeks were a blur. I established a routine. Wake up sick, chase the dragon until I felt human. Go to work if I could manage it, then come home and spend the rest of the night on the couch, lost in the smoke. But the magic was already fading. That incredible, all-consuming warmth from the first night became harder and harder to find. It was like I was chasing a memory. Soon, the high was gone completely. The first hit of the day wasn't about pleasure anymore. It was about stopping the sickness. The cold sweats, the aching bones, the twisting in my gut. Smoking just made it all go away. It let me function. Online they called it getting well. You weren't getting high, you were just getting back to zero so you could live your life. My entire existence became a cycle of feeling sick and then doing just enough to not feel sick. The peace was gone. It was just a chore. I was getting more and more frustrated. I kept buying more, thinking maybe the quality was just bad. But it was never the same. I just wanted that first feeling back. That perfect, silent blanket. I was obsessed with it. One night, I was alone in my apartment, feeling the familiar chill of withdrawal starting to creep in. I pulled out my little bag. I only had enough for the night and the next morning. I looked at the small piece I was about to break off, and I just felt hopeless. This wasn't going to get me high. It was just going to be another dose of medicine, another 10 minutes of chasing smoke to feel normal. Then a thought hit me, a clear, sharp thought that cut through the haze. What if I just did a lot more? What if I stopped portioning it out and just took a huge hit? Maybe that's what it would take to break through the tolerance. I took the entire chunk out of the bag. It was easily 4, maybe 5 times my normal dose. A voice in the back of my head, the tiny part of me that wasn't a fiend, was screaming that this was how people die. But I barely heard it. All I could think about was the possibility of feeling that warmth again. I convinced myself this was the only way. I didn't care about the risk. I just wanted the escape. I put the whole thing on a fresh piece of foil, my hands shaking. I told myself this was it. This would finally work. I held the lighter underneath and inhaled as much smoke as my lungs could possibly hold. The smoke hit me before I even finished exhaling. It wasn't the slow, creeping warmth I was chasing. It was a sledgehammer to the back of the head. Instantly, my entire body went rigid. The tin foil and straw fell from my hands and clattered on the floor. My vision blurred, and the sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the traffic outside, all melted into a single, deafening roar in my ears. I tried to take a step, maybe to get some water, but my legs didn't work. They were just dead weight. I felt myself sliding down the wall in what felt like slow motion, my head smacking against the drywall before my body folded onto the carpet. I was on the floor, staring up at the ceiling. I was completely and utterly paralyzed. My mind, however, was wide awake. It was screaming. I was trying to move my arms, my fingers, anything. Nothing responded. I was a prisoner in a body that had already quit. Then came the real terror. I realized I wasn't breathing. It wasn't a conscious decision. My body had just stopped. The automatic process was gone. I tried to force a breath, to command my lungs to inhale, but it was like trying to lift a car. My chest was a solid block of concrete. A fresh wave of absolute panic washed over me as my brain screamed for air that my body refused to take. I was going to die right here on my living room floor, fully conscious and aware of every single second of it. The edges of my vision started to go dark. A cold feeling, the opposite of the warmth I had wanted so badly, started in my feet and began creeping up my legs. I could feel my own heartbeat slowing down, each beat further apart than the last, like a dying clock. Thump, thump, thump. My last thought wasn't of family or friends. It was just a simple, horrible realization. This is it. This is how it ends. The roaring in my ears faded, and the blackness swallowed everything. I woke up with a violent gasp, my lungs burning as they pulled in air. For a second, I was just on the floor, confused. Then a wave of nausea hit me, and I realized I was lying in a cold, sticky puddle. The smell was awful. I pushed myself up and saw that I had thrown up all over myself and the carpet. My head was pounding, and every muscle in my body ached like I had been in a fight. I looked at the kitchen clock. It was almost noon. I had been out for hours. Then the memory of what happened crashed back into my head, taking the huge hit, the instant paralysis, my body shutting down, my heart slowing to nothing. I remembered the feeling of dying, the complete and total certainty that my life was over. I should have been terrified. I should have been crying, shaking, calling someone to tell them I almost died. But that wasn't my first thought. My first real thought, cutting through the pain and the filth, wasn't about fear or regret. I remember thinking to myself, with a strange sense of awe, about the drug's incredible power, that something so small could have that much control. It could literally stop your heart, shut down your lungs, and pull you right to the edge of non-existence. It wasn't a drug. It was a force of nature. The experience didn't feel like a warning. In my sick mind, it felt like a confirmation. It confirmed that I had finally found something powerful enough to silence everything. The overdose wasn't a mistake to learn from. It was just a testament to the drug's raw strength. I stumbled into the bathroom to clean myself up, my body sore and weak. But my mind was clearer than ever. The fear was gone, replaced by a single, overwhelming desire. I had to get more. I had to do it again. From the outside, my life is a caricature of suburban success. I have the 2-story colonial with the perfectly manicured lawn, the loving wife who teaches second grade, and 2 kids who are good at sports. I'm a senior partner at a competitive law firm. I drive a German sedan. On paper, I'm not just winning, I've already won. But nobody sees the pressure. They don't see the 70-hour work weeks, the constant demand to be sharper, faster, better. They don't feel the anxiety that starts churning in my stomach at 3 a.m. about a deposition or a client call. They don't know what it takes to come home after a 14-hour day and still have the energy to be a patient husband and a fun dad. To be present. To be the rock everyone thinks you are. The pressure is immense, a crushing physical weight. So I use heroin. It's not a party thing. I don't nod off on the couch or chase some euphoric high. For me, it's a tool. Every morning, in the quiet of my locked master bathroom, before my wife is even awake, I use a tiny, precisely measured amount. Just enough. It doesn't get me high. It just turns off the noise. It erases the anxiety. It quiets the screaming engine of ambition and fear in my mind, and leaves behind a calm, focused, and capable man. It's the only reason I can function at this level. On heroin, I am the perfect version of myself. I'm a killer in the courtroom, attentive and charming at home. I don't get rattled. I don't get overwhelmed. It's my secret weapon, the productivity hack that no one else has. It's the only way I can hold this perfect life together. I've convinced myself it's not an addiction. It's just maintenance. That perfect functional state didn't last. It couldn't. My precisely measured amount started to feel less like a sharpener and more like a dull, worn-out tool. The calm focus was getting harder to find. So, the dose crept up. A little more in the morning, then a bump in the car before a big meeting, then another to unwind before walking in my front door. My secret weapon was becoming an arms race against my own tolerance. And it got expensive. Fast. Even on a partner's salary, a habit like this burns a hole in your finances that you can't ignore. I started moving money around, making excuses to myself about cash flow and quarterly bonuses. I was lying to myself constantly. But the numbers on the bank statements didn't lie. For the first time, I couldn't cover my dealer and the family's credit card bill in the same week. The pressure was back, but this time it had a new, sharper edge. It was the pressure of withdrawal. The first time I stole from my wife, it felt like a heart attack. She kept a small amount of cash in her purse for the farmer's market. I remember standing in our quiet bedroom, her purse on the dresser. My hands were sweating. I was a man who argued million-dollar cases, and I was about to steal $20 for a bag. I told myself I'd replace it tomorrow. I told myself she would never even notice. I opened her wallet, took the bill, and my hand was shaking so badly I could barely close it again. The shame was suffocating. I went straight to the bathroom and used, and the warmth that followed only temporarily burned away the feeling of being a complete scumbag. That $20 became $40. Then it became all the cash she had. Soon, it wasn't enough. I was in deep, and the sickness was a wolf at the door every single morning. One day I was desperate. I was pacing the house, my skin crawling, trying to figure out what to do. My eyes landed on the mahogany jewelry box on my wife's vanity. Inside, I knew, was a gold locket her grandmother had left her. It was the one thing she ever wore to formal events. The one thing she said she'd pass down to our daughter. I remember thinking, absolutely not. That was a line I would not cross. But the thought was already there, and it wouldn't leave. The physical need was screaming louder than my conscience. I convinced myself it wasn't stealing, it was borrowing. I would go to the pawn shop and get the money and buy it back next week when my check cleared. It was a temporary loan against an asset. That was the lawyer in me, talking. The junkie was the one whose hands opened the box and took the locket. Driving to the pawn shop felt like a dream. Everything was unreal. I was in my clean German car, in my expensive suit, pulling into a grimy parking lot between a check-cashing place and a bail bondsman. The man behind the thick glass didn't even look at me. He just weighed the locket, named a price that was a fraction of its worth, and pushed the cash under the barrier. I took it and walked out. I didn't feel relief. I just felt hollow. I had taken something irreplaceable from the person I loved, and I had sold it for the one thing I now loved more. When the pandemic hit, the firm sent everyone home. Work from home was a gift from God for an addict. No more sneaking off to the bathroom, no more bumps in the car. My office was 10 feet from my bedroom. The problem was, my kids' rooms were just down the hall. My two lives were now under the same roof, separated only by a few hollow core doors. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was on a conference call with 4 other partners and the GC of a major client. I was supposed to be sharp, leading the conversation. But the morning hit hadn't been enough. My skin was starting to crawl. A cold sweat was building on my neck. The anxiety was turning my insides into a knot. The junky voice in my head was screaming that I couldn't get through this call without a fix. So I made another stupid, reckless decision. I hit the mute button on my headset and turned off my camera. "Just a Wi-Fi glitch," I typed into the chat. Then I pulled out the foil and the lighter I kept in my desk drawer. It was a practiced, silent motion. I took a long, deep drag, chasing the smoke with a little metal straw. The familiar chemical taste filled my mouth. I just needed to get right, just for the rest of the call. The relief hit me instantly, too instantly. The knot in my stomach didn't just unwind, it completely dissolved. The voices on the conference call, still tinny in my headset, faded into a distant, meaningless drone. A heavy warmth washed over me, starting in my chest and spreading into my limbs. My eyelids felt like they were made of lead. I remember thinking, just stay upright. Just for another 30 minutes. I propped my elbows on the desk, holding my head in my hands. I thought I could fake it. I thought I could ride the edge. I was wrong. I don't know how long I was out. Time just disappeared. The next thing I knew, I felt a tiny hand on my shoulder, shaking me gently. "Daddy?" a small voice said. "Daddy, are you okay?" My head snapped up so fast my neck cracked. My 5-year-old son was standing next to my chair, his face full of concern. The conference call was over. My laptop screen was dark. Then my eyes followed his gaze. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at my desk, at the crumpled, blackened piece of tin foil, at the lighter, at the little metal straw. He pointed. "What's that?" The blood drained from my face. The perfect life, the perfect family, the perfect lie. It all came crashing down in that single, silent moment. The warmth of the drug was gone, replaced by an Arctic cold. I was looking at my son, and he was looking at the wreckage of the man he thought his father was. I tried to form words. I couldn't. My mind was thick and slow, still wrapped in the last warm traces of the high. My son's innocent question hung in the air, but it felt distant, like I was hearing it through water. I could see his small finger pointing at the blackened foil, but none of it felt completely real. I just stared, my body leaden, my brain unable to assemble a lie. Then my wife appeared in the doorway. She had a soft smile on her face, but it vanished in an instant. I watched her eyes jump from my dazed expression to our son, and then to the desk. I saw the confusion on her face curdle into pure, uncomprehending horror. It wasn't the distant chatter of my coworkers on the still-active headset that finally woke me up. It was the sound that my wife made. It was a scream, but it was choked and ragged, like she was being strangled by what she was seeing. It was a sound of absolute terror and betrayal. In that 1 second, every last bit of warmth from the drug evaporated. I was jolted into a state of razor-sharp, ice-cold reality. The high was gone. There was only panic. She moved so fast. She scooped our son into her arms, turning his body away from the desk, shielding him from the sight of me. He started to cry, confused and scared by her reaction. "Mommy, what's wrong?" She held him tight, her own body trembling. She backed away from me as if I was a wild animal. "Robert, what is that?" Her voice was a whisper, but it cut through the room, shaking with a fury that was more terrifying than any shout. She wasn't looking at the desk anymore. She was looking at me, and her eyes were filled with a disgust I had never seen in my life. It hollowed me out completely. "In front of your son? Are you insane?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Every justification, every lie about maintenance and performance, all of it turned to ash. There was no argument to be made, no case to be won. The lawyer was gone. The perfect husband was gone. All that was left was a junkie, caught red-handed. She didn't wait for an answer. She shook her head, a single, final gesture. "Get out," she said, her voice dead flat. "Pack a bag and get out of this house. Now." She turned without another word and walked away, carrying our crying son with her. The door to my office clicked shut, and the sound was deafening. My whole world, the family, the career, the reputation, had just been obliterated. It didn't end with a bang. It ended with a choked scream and the quiet click of a latch. I stood there in the silence of my office. For how long, I have no idea. The house was dead quiet. I didn't hear my son crying anymore. I imagined she took him to her mother's or a friend's. Anywhere but here. I moved like a machine. I walked into the master bedroom, our bedroom, and pulled a duffel bag from the top of the closet. I didn't pack for a trip. I just threw things in. A few dress shirts, some socks, the contents of my nightstand. The things felt alien in my hands, like they belonged to someone else. I walked down the stairs I'd walked down 1,000 times. I passed the photos on the wall of our wedding, of the kids' first days of school. I didn't feel anything looking at them. I was completely hollowed out. I grabbed my car keys from the bowl by the door and walked out of my house for the last time. I drove for an hour, maybe more. I ended up pulling into one of those cheap motels off the highway, the kind with a flickering sign and doors that opened to the parking lot. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and bleach. I threw my bag on the stained duvet and sat on the edge of the squeaking bed. The flimsy door felt like it could be kicked in at any moment. I didn't think about my job. I knew it was over. A partner at the firm doesn't just disappear from a client call. I didn't think about the house or the life I had just lost. The scale of the wreckage was too big to comprehend. All of that was just noise. There was only one thing I could see when I closed my eyes. It wasn't the foil or the lighter. It wasn't even the look of disgust on my wife's face. It was the split second after she screamed. It was the look on my 5-year-old son's face as he stared at me, his little features twisted in a way I had never seen before. It was pure, unfiltered terror. Of me, his father. That image is burned into my mind. It's clearer than any memory I have. That's when I knew this wasn't about losing a house or a job. This was going to be a war, a grim, ugly fight for my children, and it was going to start right here, in this disgusting room. For a long time now, my day doesn't start with an alarm clock. It starts with the sickness. Every morning, I wake up drenched in a cold, oily sweat. My joints ache like an old man's, and there's a hard, sour knot in my stomach. Before my eyes are even fully open, my brain has only one thought, one mission that erases everything else. How do I get well? Everything from the moment I wake up is just a series of steps to get money, contact my dealer, and get a fix. Nothing else matters. This morning was different. It was worse. I woke up sick, but I knew instantly that the mission was impossible. I'd already burned through the last of my money 2 days ago. There was no one left to call, no one left to lie to. The panic set in with the cold sweat. It's a special kind of terror when you know the full-blown withdrawal is coming, and you have absolutely nothing to stop it. It's like watching a tidal wave build on the horizon and knowing you're chained to the beach. Then I remembered the film canister. For months, after every time I'd prepared a shot, I would save the little piece of bloody cotton I'd used to filter the dope. Addicts call them cottons. It's a common practice. You collect them in a bag or a bottle because you know a day like this will always come. You know you'll have nothing left but the ghosts of old highs. I stumbled out of bed, my hands shaking, and found the canister in my drawer. I dumped the little collection of gray, hardened cotton balls onto a spoon. It looked pathetic. It felt pathetic. I added a few drops of water and used the plunger from a syringe to smash them down, trying to squeeze out every last microscopic remnant of heroin. It's called a rewash. A desperate last-ditch effort. The water that I drew back up was a faint, sickly brownish color. It was barely anything. I knew it wouldn't get me high. It wouldn't even make me feel good. The only thing this shot would do, if I was lucky, was stop the hell that was about to begin. It was just enough to push the sickness back for an hour, maybe 2, and then the clock would start ticking again. The relief was a cruel joke. It wasn't even relief, just a momentary pause on the agony. The hour or 2 I bought myself with that rewash felt like 10 minutes. Then the sickness came roaring back, and it was angrier this time, like I had insulted it. It started with a cold sweat that soaked my clothes in seconds. Then the hot flashes, my skin on fire. My legs started kicking uncontrollably against the thin motel sheets. It felt like my bones were vibrating, like my whole skeleton was trying to crawl out of my skin. My stomach was a knot of acid. I was completely overcome. I tore the room apart. Not in anger, but in a kind of frantic, pathetic desperation. I emptied my duffel bag on the floor, shaking every shirt and sock. I ran my hands through the fibers of the disgusting carpet, praying I'd dropped a crumb of tar somewhere. I checked the pockets of the one suit jacket I'd stuffed in the bag, then checked them again. Nothing. The reality was a concrete wall. There was no money. There was no dope. There was no way out. Then I saw it. Lying on the stained carpet near the trash can was one of the cottons I had dumped out earlier. It must have rolled away. It wasn't just gray and used. It was dirty. It had clearly been on the floor, picking up whatever filth was down there. It was a piece of garbage. My mind split in 2. One part, the tiny, faint voice of reason that was still left, was screaming. It was telling me about bacteria, about cotton fever, about endocarditis. I had heard the stories. I knew people could die from this, from a stupid, dirty cotton, a horrible septic infection that cooks you from the inside out. But the other voice, the addict's voice, was so much louder. It didn't even argue. It just pointed to the reality of my body. The shaking, the nausea, the skin-crawling horror of the moment. The risk of a future infection seemed abstract. The agony of the withdrawal was happening right now. It was the only thing that was real. Prioritizing a tiny chance of relief over my own life felt ridiculous. But I did it. I picked the filthy little cotton off the floor, dropped it into the spoon, and cooked it up. I knew this was a terrible, terrible idea. I drew up the cloudy, brownish liquid into the syringe. I didn't care. I just needed the pain to stop. I pulled the needle out and waited. I was expecting that tiny, fleeting moment of not sickness, that slight easing of the ache in my bones. I was waiting for the frantic noise in my head to go quiet, even for just a few minutes. For about 30 seconds, there was nothing. Not relief, but not sickness either. Just a brief, quiet pause. Then, the cold hit me. It wasn't the usual chill of withdrawal. This was different. This was an arctic, violent cold that started deep inside my bones and erupted outward. My teeth started chattering so hard I thought they were going to crack. My whole body began to spasm in huge, uncontrollable shudders. It was like I'd been plunged into a tank of ice water. I curled up in a ball on the filthy bed, pulling the thin, scratchy blanket over my head. But it did nothing. The cold wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside me. Then the fire started. Even as I was shaking from the cold, my skin became incredibly hot. I was drenched in sweat, my clothes sticking to me, but I was still freezing. The chills were so violent that my whole bed frame was shaking. This wasn't withdrawal. I knew withdrawal. I lived and breathed withdrawal. This was something else entirely. It felt like my body was trying to shake itself apart, like every muscle was in a state of revolt. A single terrifying thought floated up through the chaos in my head. Cotton fever. That's what this was. I had heard the stories. It wasn't just a bad reaction. It was a serious, systemic infection. Sepsis. I had mainline injected garbage from the floor of a motel room directly into my bloodstream. The tiny moment of hope for relief was gone. It was replaced with the absolute certainty that I had made a fatal mistake. I was alone, and my own body was trying to cook me alive from the inside out. The shaking got worse. It wasn't just chills anymore, not just chattering teeth. My whole body seized up. My back arched off the bed in a long, rigid spasm. My muscles pulled so tight, I thought they would snap. Then the convulsion hit. My arms and legs started to jerk violently, uncontrollably, slamming against the mattress and the cheap wooden headboard. I banged my head over and over, but I couldn't feel the pain. My body wasn't mine. It was just an animal thrashing in a cage. My mind started to go. The fever was cooking my brain. Things stopped making sense. The sound of a truck on the highway became the rumble of an ambulance coming for me. A distant siren wasn't for a fire, it was for me. The police. They knew what I'd done. They were coming to kick the door in. I was trapped in a thick, hot fog of paranoia. The convulsions would stop for a moment, and I'd be left limp and drenched in sweat, listening to the phantom sounds, absolutely terrified. A tiny piece of my brain, the part that wasn't on fire, screamed at me. "Call 911. You are dying. You need a hospital." The thought was so clear, so rational. But it was immediately swallowed by an even greater terror. The police would come with the paramedics. They would find the spoon, the syringe, the filth. I was already a fugitive from my own life. I couldn't handle a felony arrest on top of it. In my delirious state, going to jail was a more immediate and terrifying threat than dying. "It's just the fever," I told myself. "I can beat it. I can sweat it out." The logic was insane, but it was all I had. I just had to ride it out. I just had to survive the night without anyone knowing. The convulsions started again, another wave of violent, full-body spasms. I was exhausted, but my body kept fighting. The room was spinning. My vision started to blur, little black spots dancing at the edges. I couldn't fight it anymore. I was too tired. I just wanted it to stop. The thought of the police faded away, replaced by a deep, dark exhaustion. I felt myself going limp. The shaking finally stopped, and I let my eyes close. The next thing I remember is a face. It was blurry and it was screaming my name. I think it was my roommate. I have a vague memory of being lifted, of cold air hitting my face, and then the sound of a siren that seemed very far away. It's all just disconnected flashes. Then, there was a different kind of waking up. A slow, steady beep was the first thing to cut through the fog. I opened my eyes, and the ceiling was white and sterile. There was an IV line taped to the back of my hand, snaking up to a bag of clear liquid. I could feel a tube in my nose. I was in a hospital. I tried to sit up, but my whole body felt like it was made of lead. A doctor came in later. He looked exhausted. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He told me my roommate had found me unconscious and called an ambulance. He said I was septic. He told me the bacteria from the dirty cotton had caused a massive, systemic infection. My kidneys were failing. My temperature had been so high that I'd had multiple seizures. He looked me straight in the eye and said that if my roommate had found me even 30 minutes later, there would have been nothing they could do. The doctor's words were terrifying, but they weren't the worst part. The worst part came after he left me alone in the quiet of that room. The real horror wasn't the diagnosis. It was a memory. I remembered lying on that bed, my body convulsing, my brain on fire, consciously making the decision not to call for help. I remembered weighing my options, a slow, agonizing death versus the shame of getting arrested. And I chose death. My addiction had so completely twisted my most basic survival instincts that I was willing to die in a pool of my own sweat on a disgusting motel floor, just to avoid the consequences. The infection was in my blood, but the sickness was in my head. Me and my boyfriend were a team. That's how we saw it. We worked together at the same restaurant, shared a small one-bedroom apartment, and split all the bills. We were partners, and we were both addicted to heroin. To us, those two facts weren't in conflict. We had it under control. We called ourselves functional, and we actually believed it. We had our routines. In the morning, we'd get well together before our shifts. After work, we'd pick up and spend the evening on the couch, smoking foil after foil, watching TV. We told ourselves it was no different than a normal couple having a few beers after a long day. We still made it to work. We still paid the rent. We held it all together. We were a unit, a well-oiled machine built for two things: working and getting high. Our whole identity, our whole sense of control, was built on one single, absolute rule. It was the only thing that separated us from the people we saw on the street, the ones with haunted eyes and track marks. The rule was simple. We don't use needles. Ever. Smoking it was fine. Chasing the dragon was our ritual. But a needle was a line we would never, ever cross. That was for junkies, for losers, for people who had given up. We weren't them. We had jobs. We had each other. We thought that one rule was a shield. We thought it made us smarter, better, and safer than every other addict who had come before us. We had no idea it was the only thing holding the floor together right before it was about to give way. Our system, the one we were so proud of, had a fatal flaw. It was expensive. Chasing the dragon is incredibly wasteful. You lose half the smoke to the air. As our tolerance grew, we had to smoke more and more just to get well. Getting high was a luxury we could barely remember. Our paychecks from the restaurant were basically gone the day we got them. We started being late with our half of the rent, then we stopped paying it at all. The eviction notice on our door didn't feel real. The only thing that felt real was the sickness. We pooled the last of our money. Crumpled bills and loose change scraped from the bottom of my purse. It wasn't enough, not even for a day's worth. We met our guy, shamefaced, and handed him what we had. He just looked at the sad little pile of cash and shrugged. "This isn't going to get you well," he said. It wasn't a judgment, just a fact. Then he looked at us, both of us probably pale and starting to sweat. "You guys are still smoking this? That's your problem. You're wasting it." He held up the little baggie. "You switch your ROA, you can make this last 2 days, get high off it even." We knew what he meant. ROA. Route of administration. He meant using a needle. We didn't say anything. We just took the dope and walked back to the apartment in silence. We sat on the couch, the tiny bag on the coffee table between us like a grenade. We were both thinking the same thing. Our one rule, the thing that kept us from being them, the junkies. But the sickness was setting in. My stomach was starting to cramp, and a cold ache was spreading in my bones. I looked at him, and I could see the same fear and desperation in his eyes. The choice wasn't between smoking and shooting. The real choice was between breaking our one rule and descending into the full-blown hell of withdrawal. And withdrawal was a guarantee. "We can't," I said, but my voice had no strength. It was a whisper. He looked at the bag, then back at me. "Just this once," he said. "The rent is due. We can't afford to be sick. Just this one time to get by. Then we go back." The logic was twisted and perfect. It was the answer my addict brain wanted to hear. It was a temporary measure, an exception to prove the rule. I nodded, and just like that, the line we swore we would never cross disappeared. Neither of us knew what we were doing. We had the small bag, a spoon from the kitchen, and a single new syringe our dealer had given us. We sat on the floor of the living room, our hands shaking. This was the one thing we were never supposed to do. This was the final line. It felt disgusting and clinical. He offered to go first, to be the guinea pig. But something in me just wanted it over with. I couldn't stand the anxiety of watching him do it. He tied an old shoelace around my bicep. The veins on my inner arm, ones I'd never paid any attention to, popped up. They looked so fragile. He cooked up half of our tiny supply, the brown liquid looking dark and terrifying in the little plastic syringe. I looked away as he brought the needle to my arm. There was a sharp, cold pinch. It was a violation, a feeling I had never experienced before, and my whole body tensed up. "Okay," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm pushing it." The rush wasn't a wave. It wasn't a warm blanket. It was a full-body explosion. It slammed into me with the force of a car crash, a deafening roar in my ears, and a flash of pure white heat behind my eyes. My heart felt like it stopped for a second, then started again with a single, massive thump that I felt in my throat. The warmth from smoking was a gentle campfire. This was the sun exploding directly into my bloodstream. Every single anxious thought, every muscle ache, every trace of sickness was instantly and violently obliterated. It was a terrifying, overwhelming, and absolutely perfect high. As the insane intensity settled into a deep, profound calm, I opened my eyes. He was looking at me, his own face a mix of fear and awe. I just nodded. I knew in that instant, and I knew that he knew. Our rule was a joke. The idea of just one time was the most pathetic lie we had ever told ourselves. Going back to smoking felt like an insult. It was a waste of dope, a waste of money, a waste of time. We had just found the real thing. That first shot was the beginning of the end for our arms. The hunt for fresh veins started immediately. The line we swore we would never cross was gone, and the only thing left in its place was a needle. The hunt for fresh veins turned into a full-time job, a horrible losing battle. In a matter of weeks, our arms were a war zone of bruises, track marks, and collapsed veins. It became a ritual of its own. We'd spend an hour, sometimes longer, just trying to find a usable spot, poking and prodding with the rig, getting more and more frustrated as the sickness started to set in. One night, it was over. There was nothing left. We had prepared one shot, the last of our stuff, and it was my boyfriend's turn. He had the tie wrapped around his bicep, but both of his arms were just a mess of scarred tissue. Nothing would register. He finally threw the tie on the floor, his hands shaking with a mix of withdrawal and rage. "It's no good," he said, his voice tight with panic. He looked at the loaded syringe on the coffee table, then looked at me. The sickness was coming on fast. "I'm gonna have to go for my neck." A spike of pure ice went through me. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Don't. It's too dangerous." We all knew the stories. Hitting the carotid artery by mistake. Strokes, people dying instantly. But he wasn't listening. He was trapped. The only thing that was real was the physical agony that was about to start. He sat on the edge of the couch, tilted his head back, and his fingers prodded the side of his neck, searching for his jugular. I couldn't breathe. I just watched as he closed his eyes, took a shaky breath, and pushed the needle in. He tried to register, to pull back blood, but nothing came up. He was already committed. He was too sick and too desperate to pull out and waste the shot. He just slammed the plunger down. An awful, strangled scream ripped out of his throat. "Damn it! I missed!" he yelled, yanking the needle out. He immediately grabbed his neck, his face twisted in pain. "It burns! It burns like hell!" I ran over to him, and what I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't just a little pain or a small bump. A huge lump was erupting on the side of his neck. It was swelling at a terrifying speed, like a balloon being blown up just under his skin. Within seconds, it was the size of a golf ball, then an egg. The skin over it grew tight and shiny, turning a deep, angry red. He was gasping, clutching at the swelling, his eyes wide with a terror that went beyond just a missed shot. This was something else. This was a massive, violent infection happening in real time. We had created a medical emergency, and the clock was ticking. We got to the ER and they took him back immediately. There was no waiting. The nurses saw the swelling, the angry red skin stretched tight over the side of his neck, and they moved. I was left in the waiting room, alone under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I just sat there, numb, replaying the moment in my head. The pop of the skin, the strangled scream. Hours went by. Eventually, a doctor came out to find me. He looked tired and grim. He told me my boyfriend had a massive, deep tissue abscess from the missed shot. The bacteria from his skin, forced deep into the muscle with non-sterile liquid, had created a life-threatening infection that was spreading toward his airway. He told me they had to perform emergency surgery to cut it open and drain the poison out. He survived the surgery, but when I finally saw him, he wasn't the same. He was pale and weak, with a thick bandage taped across the half of his neck. When they finally took it off a few days later, the scar was hideous. A long, puckered, disfigured line that looked like a permanent gash. The surgeon told us the infection had been so deep it had damaged the nerves in his face. Now the left side of his mouth drooped slightly. He couldn't smile properly anymore. And that's when the reality of it all just crushed me. The bitter, horrible irony of it. The whole reason we broke our rule, the whole reason we switched to the needle, was to be more efficient, to save money, to make our supply last longer. We crossed that line to feel like we were getting a handle on our finances, on our addiction. We thought we were being smart. But that one smart decision led directly to this. It led to an emergency surgery, to a hospital bill that would ruin us for years, and to my partner being permanently mutilated. He would carry a hideous scar on his neck and a lopsided smile for the rest of his life. Our shared delusion that we were a team, that we were in control of any of this, was completely and utterly shattered. All we had done was trade a few dollars for a piece of his face. I'd been using for 15 years. At that point, it's not a party and it's not a crisis. It's just a job. My whole life was a quiet, gray routine of managing the sickness, getting the money, and then getting the dope. There was no drama, no highs, no lows, just a flat line that I had to maintain every single day. The world could be on fire, and it wouldn't matter as long as I had enough to get through tomorrow morning. That was the whole universe. Then my phone rang one afternoon. It was my younger sister, Chloe. I could hear her sobbing before I even said hello. She was a complete wreck, hysterical, choking on her own words. Her boyfriend of 3 years had dumped her. He was kicking her out of their shared apartment. She had nowhere to go. She was falling apart. I remember just standing in my kitchen, listening to her cry about this guy. It was like listening to a broadcast from another planet. A breakup, a broken heart. It felt so incredibly normal, so clean. Her world was ending because a boy didn't love her anymore. I hadn't had a problem that simple in over a decade. My problems were about collapsed veins and dirty cottons. She asked if she could come stay with me, just for a little while until she got on her feet. She said she just needed her big brother. The idea was a joke. I wasn't equipped to be anyone's emotional support animal. But saying no would have been a long, exhausting conversation, and I just didn't have the energy for it. So I told her yes. Get a new problem for a few days, I thought. But as soon as I hung up, the only thing I could think was how much better I was going to have to get at hiding my works. She had been in my apartment for 3 days, and for 3 days, she had not stopped crying. It was a constant, low-level sound in the background of my life. The sound of a broken heart. She would sit on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, just weeping over this guy. I would turn up the volume on the TV. The sickness was starting to creep into my bones. The familiar ache, the thin layer of sweat. I couldn't wait for her to fall asleep. I couldn't hide in the bathroom again, listening for footsteps. I just didn't care enough. I went into my bedroom, shut the door, and laid out my works on the nightstand. I wasn't even rushing. It was just a job that needed to be done. I had the tie around my bicep and was just about to register when the door creaked open. It was Chloe. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She just stood there in the doorway, staring, not at my face, but at my arm, at the syringe in my hand. I didn't say anything. I just pulled the tie off with my teeth and waited. I expected screaming or disgust or another round of sobbing. Instead, her voice was quiet, a desperate whisper. Does that make it stop?" she asked, gesturing with a shaky hand toward the needle. "The feeling, the way it hurts so much you can't breathe, does that stop it?" I looked at her, then at the rig in my hand. In my head, a cold, bitter thought surfaced. She thought a breakup was the worst pain in the world. It was almost funny. In that moment, I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel like a protective older brother. I felt nothing at all. I just saw another person who wanted to be numb, and I had the answer. I didn't even hesitate. "Sit down," I said, my voice flat. She moved to the edge of the bed like she was in a trance. I dumped my own shot back into the spoon and added the rest of what I had, enough for a first-timer. I tied the shoelace around her arm, the one that was clean and pale and perfect. I told her to make a fist. The vein popped up instantly. I pushed the needle into her arm, and her whole body flinched. She didn't look. She just stared at the wall, her face a mask of grief. I registered, saw the bloom of red blood enter the barrel, and looked at her one last time. There was no one home behind her eyes. Just pain. I pushed the plunger down and destroyed her life. I pulled the needle out of her arm and watched. It was fascinating in a clinical, horrible way. The rush hit her like a physical blow. Her whole body went slack, her head lolling back against the pillow as she let out a long, slow sigh. The tears just stopped. The shuddering sobs that had been the soundtrack of my apartment for the last 3 days were gone. The room was finally quiet. She lay there for a minute, her eyes half closed, a dazed, empty look on her face. Then she slowly turned her head and looked at me. There was no gratitude in her eyes. There was no horror. There was nothing. The vibrant, agonizing pain of her heartbreak had been completely erased, and it had taken every other piece of her with it. She wasn't my sister anymore. She was just like me. The thought didn't bring guilt. Not then. It brought a strange, cold clarity. I hadn't saved her. I hadn't helped her. I had simply passed on the only thing I truly owned, my disease. For 15 years, this sickness had taken everything from me. My job, my friends, my future. Now, in the quiet of my bedroom, I had given it to the last person in the world I had left. I had fixed her broken heart by stopping it from beating at all. That's the final lie the drug tells you. You think you're in control. You think it's a tool, a productivity hack to keep a career, a maintenance plan to hold a family together, a clever trick to make the dope last longer. You think it's a medicine you can prescribe to someone to kill their pain. But it's not a tool you wield. It's a parasite. It finds the thing you care about most, your ambition, your love, your family, and it teaches you how to sacrifice it. It convinces the lawyer to trade his son for a moment of peace. It convinces the addict to inject filth from the floor for 1 more hour of life. It convinces the boyfriend to risk his life for a more efficient high. And it turns a brother's love into a quiet, monstrous act that ends one life and sentences another. The drug promises to solve your problem. But the truth is, you are its solution. You are the warm body it needs to live in, the hands it uses to destroy, and the story it leaves behind when it's done.